Hello, everybody. Good afternoon if you're in Europe, and good morning if you're joining us from the US, and good night if you're joining us from Asia. This is Daniel Torres here from the Dwyer Partners Executive Search and also the podcast, the FMCG guys. Thanks for joining us today. We have quite a lot of people joining us, so that's pretty exciting. And we're going to talk about what's happening in supply chain. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation out there about like the global disruptions that have happened, lots of structural issues, COVID-19 later, and all the recent events that have happened this year with war in Ukraine and other stuff that I won't talk about, but we'll let the experts talk about. Accompanying me, moderating this roundtable, we have Federico Marchesi from Brembo. Hi, Federico.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Daniel, thank you for the invite.
Thanks for joining me again. Federico joined me last year to discuss the state of supply chain in 2021 with Fabio Grazioli. So it's good to have you again in a new experience now doing it live. So this will be, as you can see, done live, but you'll also be able to access this content later in audio through the FMCG Guys podcast. So we'd like to introduce the guest that we have with us today here. On one side, we have Lorenzo Giacomoni and Joachim Schueck. So thanks, guys, for joining us today.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for inviting me, Daniel.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. So maybe as a matter of introduction to let the audience get acquainted with you two, maybe you can tell us a bit about yourselves, what you're doing now, and maybe a bit about your background. I don't know, maybe Joachim, you can start.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, again, good afternoon to everyone. Good morning, good evening. My name is Joachim Schueck. I'm an independent consultant since about a year. I'm managing director of JPS International Consulting, advising international clients on digital business transformation, supply chain optimization, and leadership development. I spent more than 25 years in corporate environments working for global brands like Adidas, PUMA, Lacoste, and Swarovski. Most of my time in global supply chain management functions. And since 1 year, I'm transferring my experience and competencies and know-how to other clients. And it's a fantastic experience seeing what's going on out there. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Lots to talk about, obviously. Lorenzo Giacomoni, maybe you can tell the audience a bit about yourself as well.
Yeah, for the time being, as Joachim is an independent consultant and is a similar career path as Joachim. I mean, 20 plus years in supply chain and operation. Overall expert in business transformation, in supply chain end-to-end with a good impact on sustainability and digitalization. So that's me.
Excellent. And I can confirm, Lorenzo, that the connection now is good because we were having a few minutes before we went live to see everyone's connection, and it looks like we got it all right. By the way, to the audience, a quick message. As it happens in this type of roundtables, I want to make sure that this is an open discussion, not just between us four, but we'd like to have you guys on board as well. So if anyone has any questions during the conversation, please write them on the comments section, and we'll answer them either during the discussion or maybe at the end, depending on the flow and the dynamics. So let's go right into it. Federico, I know you have one initial question. I'll let you go for it.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would like to ask you guys is, what is your expectation about disruption trends in supply chain? The last few years, you went through, as probably most of us work in supply chain, several disruptions. We got COVID, we got semiconductor shortages, we got raw material shortages, a war in Ukraine, now inflation. What do you expect for the next couple of months, years, in terms of disruption trend? Stabilization, do you expect situation ongoing as it is now, or somehow even worsening?
Who do you want to start?
Go ahead.
Okay. So as you said, I mean, the last 2 years has been very, very challenging for the overall supply chain. It was fun enough. I have to say that all the supply chain guys has not been bored. I have to say that in the last 2 years, what we have faced is the fact that the demand was still there. So the issue was above all about how to support the business and with all the issues that you mentioned. Now I think that the situation is going to be a bit different. I mean that the demand is going to be impacted by the inflation that we are seeing, which is pretty high, and this is going to soften a bit the supply chain issues that we have been facing so far.
Yeah, from my perspective, I can echo what Lorenzo was saying. Of course, we all experienced during the last 2.5 years unprecedented challenges in the supply chain. Unpredictability all over the place, but I do expect over the next coming months and also years, with all the geopolitical issues, the energy crisis, etc., supply chain disruptions to stay. They are going to be a sustained challenge for global companies. I also have seen that there was a lot of demand out there. Demand is still out there. I would say that goes across industries. And of course, I also see that obviously a lot of companies from my former experience working for the companies, but also now with working with different companies from different industries, they all take a deep look and a big assessment about their supply chain setup in order to move into a better place to cover themselves a bit more than what they have been in the last 2.5 years. So,
And just a follow up here, what if like this obviously is still demand in the view of a potential slowdown?
Yep.
Is that a scenario that you contemplate, or do you think that in terms of like global trade, it will be the demand will more or less keep up?
It really depends on the region, and it really depends how COVID situation is going to evolve. Okay, because we know we have seen that COVID has impacted the demand in China overall. So we do not have. I do not pretend to have the crystal ball here because nobody knows. But the point is that inflation now, to me, is going to impact in any case the demand long term.
On the other hand, I would also say there is still a lot of demand out there. I think, yes, there might be regional differences, but there's a lot of money to spend. There's a lot of global players that plan with growth strategies. Of course, they are planning to invest, or they are currently investing a lot more into agility and resilience, as we would say. So there are a lot of investments into capacity building. There's still investments in flexibility, agility, also in inventories, in order to be a little bit more on the safe side, rather than an extreme cost focus that we have seen since the financial crisis. A lot of financial-driven decisions were taken in order to optimize inventories, cutting costs in the supply chain. And I'm seeing that definitely there is a change, that lost sales becomes an increased hot topic, has always been a hot topic, but to safeguard or to protect yourself against lost sales, against a lost demand that you cannot fulfill, there's a lot of investment going on, despite all the crisis elements on the market.
And if you look back into from March 2020, when the world went upside down, until now, where supply chain has become, well, ironically, when COVID was more scary, if you like, at the beginning, supply chain kept on going as normal. It was more like not even post-COVID, because we're still living with it, but the months after the big lockdowns in the West and so on, where we saw the first very big supply chain disruptions. I know that this actually in both your cases, Lorenzo and Joachim, you've been both in corporate roles and in consulting roles in these last 2 years. So if you look back, what type of key learnings can you extract from this situation? And do you think that this can help you prevent other crises, like navigate other crises better?
Yeah, maybe if I start with my reflections, let's say back in when I was still in a corporate role. I mean, it's my last company at Swarovski. We have embarked in 2017-18 already on a significant or considerable supply chain transformation program that was spanning across. Of course, not knowing that a global pandemic would be hitting, and therefore, I would say there was already a lot of good measures taken, like investments into a proper infrastructure, having an end-to-end visibility in the supply chain, so that you could increase your productivity with regard to the decision making or understanding the options. Of course, initially in 2018, this was part of a growth strategy, but then when the pandemic hit, the increased visibility and the end-to-end integration definitely also helped to manage the capacities down, to know exactly how your demand is tracking. So you almost had a real-time visibility of how the demand was tracking. Of course, it was tracking negative, very negative. So you had to have, at least you saw much faster than before, to take actions much faster than before. Reducing capacities, reducing, let's say, purchase orders out there, and still have good visibility on availability of what was out there. And of course, I mean, in an omni-channel environment that we were in, obviously the whole shift towards the online business was enormous, and that obviously created some other challenges. On the grand scheme of things, you had big supply shortages, you had the challenge to run down capacities, but you still had to fulfill an immense growth on the online side. So that was a very tricky situation, but fortunately there was increased visibility so that we could navigate through that situation, I would say, in a decent way.
Lorenzo, what were your takeaways?
Well, I have to agree with Joachim. For sure, end-to-end is a must. End-to-end visibility is a must. And what happened is that, given the fact that the current context was eating both the top line and the bottom line of the P&L, so far every single board has decided to improve or to boost the program about improving resilience and agility. Under this perspective, end-to-end has to talk as well to collaboration. So I do believe that in this kind of context, of course, we have to strengthen the collaboration with all our customers and as well with our supplier in order to anticipate what we cannot predict, because that for sure is going to help about having a good visibility or better visibility for the future. But for sure, this is going to be improved with a more robust collaboration with customer and with supplier.
And for you, Federico, actually, out of curiosity, since you're in supply chain as well, any quick takeaways? And I know you shared some when we talked last year, but
I would say definitely end-to-end visibility. That's a common, I would say, probably common across different industries in supply chain. It has been very important in managing the most recent, I would say, disruption that we have been facing. Of course, the industry where I come from, and that's actually one of the follow-up that I wanted to ask you, the industry I work in doesn't really have an omni-channel opportunity, let's say. From what you, Lorenzo, and Joachim are discussing, it seems that somehow the disruption of the last 2.5 years accelerated this omni-channel, or I would say online go-to-market.
Yeah, it's in our case for sure. This is a reality. We were in a kind of multi-channel context, and we have worked in order to improve the omni-channel perspective. We know that the customer is switching from one channel to the other one, and the supply chain has to cope with this new trend.
Good. Let me ask another question that is really, I would like to get your reflection and your point of view. Do you expect even looking forward, that somehow the disruption we have been experiencing, together with the ever-rising price of containers, ever-rising risk of disruption, is somehow putting a hold or a break to globalization? And if that's the case, are you taking action to localize your supply chain, or did you take action in your past experiences in localization?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, there's definitely, I would say, as part of the reassessment of the global supply chains, I think the globalization has slowed down. I would, almost call it globalization. I don't know if you heard that terminology, but I think it has been kicked around already since quite a while. So the globalization trend is definitely slowing down. There's a lot of, as part of the assessment, I would say, especially on the sourcing side of the business, are companies rethinking and going into a more regionalized approach? And of course, you hear the terms of reshoring, nearshoring, or friendshoring, where you want to have reliable partners. You want to have your suppliers in reliable, I would say, reliable connections, so that you have a proper reliability on your supply side, and be closer to your markets, right? So there could definitely be a trend of more regionalization from my perspective.
Yeah, fully agree with this perspective. I think that we were used to having three pillars also for supply chain, for the entire supply chain, which was cost, cash, and service. Now we have to introduce as well resilience, agility, and sustainability. And given this, above all, if we look at the sustainability, everyone is trying to rethink the global setup.
Yeah.
I think what comes with it, obviously, there are some increased cost pressures from some rearrangements here in the supply network. So therefore, still the element of efficiency and automation is a strong push that companies are investing. However, as I said earlier, it's not a minimization effort, I would say. There's the focus is definitely going on the value. What value are you going to provide to your customers in multiple channels in the different markets? And that could definitely be different. So there is a more, I would say, precise focus on specific value for specific regions or channel customers. And coupled with, I would say, continuously improved efficiencies in the supply chain and automation, yet smaller distances, higher reactivity with higher inventories, and also the acceptance of higher costs to a certain extent in order to protect against lost sales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rishabh Chandra said from the audience, was actually asking, probably in parallel to this in some way, if the world is moving towards a lean supply chain. He says, starting from the manufacturing units and the warehouses to the planning, is it rightly moving towards a lean system? And does that have something to do with globalization, or is it a different variable, if you like? I'm talking from my ignorance, I have to say.
I think that we have not just to see supply chain just as a kind of squeezing costs down or improving cash. We have to have a kind of holistic view and to see supply chain as a key pillar to achieve the business strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, lean is, of course, a specific, I mean, we could have, I don't know, an hour of discussion about the whole lean, or the terminology lean. Of course, you do not want to waste any resources, whether it be energy, whether it is resources, investments, capacities, whatsoever. So definitely, I think it's always a must that in supply chain, you strive for efficiencies and continuous improvement. However, I think a lot of companies have realized during the last 2 years that they maybe have only looked to supply chain to cut costs, rather than seeing a supply chain as an enabler, a value creator, and making a difference. Because you also probably have seen it and read it in many articles that competition of supply chains sometimes makes the difference. It's not just about the products, It's not just about the marketing, the assets that you're using for that, right? It's also a competition of supply chains. So if you can, I would say, manage certain volatility and still provide good service, I think that the consumer centricity, customer focus is super important. And for that, of course, you need to find the right balance, how lean you can go. But technically, I would say there's a greater acceptance that there is investments needed in inventories, in buffer stocks, etc., than it was before.
Which, Federico, actually that brings us to the next question we had. Maybe you can ask it, because I think you'll be able to phrase it better than me.
Yeah, let's say this comes from a bit of reasoning that I did personally, and also a lot of colleagues working supply chain are doing now. Do you take any different decision about the balance between service level, inventory, and cost? And I'm interested specifically to understand how you're looking at stock right now. Is it still seen as a kind of a waste that is naturally needed to be resized, or are you seeing it more as a strategic investment for the future?
I have to say that during the pandemic, during these last 2 years, everybody has learned to be more pragmatic. So you had to define which were the priorities, and the priority at that time was really to try to support the business as better as you could. So under this perspective, yes, for sure, inventory was one of the lever in order to better support the business. And then, of course, you have to choose which are the item for which you want to increase the inventory or not, and by region as well.
Yeah, I would also say that I've seen that the trend is going a little bit away from a just-in-time philosophy. Of course, it depends a little bit by industry, obviously. When you look at the automotive industry, I mean, they have had huge shortages, as you mentioned it, on the electronic side. On the other hand, I mean, they navigated very well. When you look at their profits, the companies right now, they have never been higher than before, because there were a lot of governmental subsidiaries, right? There was no need of going down with prices and give some rebates to the products like car manufacturers, and they could actually navigate through the current crisis extremely well. Now you can argue, is that maybe too much on that optimization, especially as soon as let's say some governmental subsidies are reducing, then obviously I would expect that there's definitely, as I said before, more appreciation for inventories and stock to increase safety, security, but safety in the sense of reliability. Also what it means in terms of stock, it means energy, it means sustainability, that you want to make sure that you reduce your emissions and you have, I would say, a reliable partnership with your supply base, where, as Lorenzo said earlier, end-to-end visibility is key, that you are looking beyond the four walls of your company and integrating with your partners.
Definitely. And then there's another element that actually, interestingly, we haven't talked about yet. It's about like the technology solutions and supply chain. How important have these been when navigating this crisis or these disruptions that we've seen the last couple of years? And what do you think is coming next in terms of like tech-enabled solutions and supply chain?
I mean, from my perspective, obviously, I think the pandemic gave a huge boost to the digitalization and the whole transformation here globally. We talked about the never seen growth rates in the online business, for instance. Now it's softening a little bit because, of course, some, I would say, on retail and B2B business have come back significantly. But I would say from a technology point of view, obviously the integration, the connectivity across the end-to-end supply chain, I think has hugely benefited here. There's a lot of great tools out there, analytics tools, I would say machine learning tools that give you predictive or even prescriptive solutions to navigate through your supply chain challenges. An example is when you look at planning systems, for instance, right? You have the demand sensing. You do not have your bottom-up forecasting as resource intensive anymore as it used to be, with a lot of people on the ground. I think you have a lot of you can leverage a lot of technology to work with demand sensing algorithms, getting better in order to create your, I would say, a most accurate plan to work against, and of course to update the plan almost real time. I think that is significant, and definitely there will be more in that direction, so that you are, I would say, expanding, or companies expand into kind of a platform technology where they are integrating with their network on the customer and supplier side across different systems that give you the right analytics tools to enable proactive decision making and also fast execution. So there's definitely more to come in that.
Mm-hmm. I see Federico taking some notes, so I gather that was that was pretty relevant. Lorenzo, how do you see digital solutions enabling? Yeah, how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, I think that overall digitalization is a must, a long-term strategy that has to be implemented. We were talking before about the customer centricity and the need to improve supply chain, the omni-channel supply chain versus the multi-channel supply chain, as I was saying before. But then again, I think that the future will be about data analytics for sure, in order to address operational excellence and sustainability. And more than this, what I think is that we have to invest much more in enhanced control towers and end-to-end planning automation.
Mm-hmm.
I agree 100% on with Joachim saying that collaboration has to be enhanced as well by education.
By what? Sorry?
Digitalization. Yeah.
Okay. What about, we were talking with Federico before when we were preparing for this about the lack of the difficulty to find talent in supply chain. Do you think it's like a general trend in like in other areas where we're seeing the same type of difficulties, or is it something specific about supply chain due to high pressure, churn, getting competitive offers from elsewhere? By the way, I don't know, Lorenzo, if you're with us, because we can't see you anymore. But if you want to turn off your video, you can stay here with the audio if you prefer. If your connection is having some issues.
I'm with you, and I'm really sorry for the line because it's pretty bad here. So if you don't mind, I will turn off the video, and I will try to keep on going with the macro. Okay. So when talking about the talents, as you were mentioning, I think that it is really a mix of the two situations that you mentioned. So on one side, you were mentioning about high pressure and competitive offers, and yet on the other side was about a greater reconciliation. All in all, we have to see that in any case, it is up to the manager to provide a good vision and to reduce the pressure on the staff. So I think that at the end we come back to the old situation where the manager has to play a key role, keeping the talent with you.
And Joachim, how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I would not confirm something like a big resignation when it comes to supply chain talent. Of course, the increased focus and appreciation of supply chain as a function or operations, or if you want to call it, for a global company is helping. So there's a lot of more, what I've seen, there's more younger people that are feeling attracted more to the area of supply chain, because they're seeing the elevation to a more strategic function. Many companies, it was seen as a cost factor, but once a company is really committed and serious about making supply chain an enabling function, sitting on the table in the boardroom, having seat in the boardroom, I think that is attracting a lot of talents. Now, the talents obviously need to meet certain criteria in terms of resilience, the pressure withstanding. I mean, the world is changing daily. Yet you still have to, go for a strong vision, of course, provided by the company business direction, the business strategy, but also the supply chain strategy. So not everybody, I would say, is equally suited to work in supply chain, because you have to have multiple talents in terms of being analytical, thinking in networks, collaborating on a lateral and across hierarchies level, driving on a strategic level, but also being able to drill down to the details in order to find issues or resolve some of the issues. So for, I would say, people that feel attracted by complexity and not shying away from it and just trying to be black and white on certain things, then I think supply chain is a great field. And this is what I would be hoping for, that there's it's so diverse and international, and I would say diverse in terms of technology, financial elements, commercial elements, of course, hardcore analytics, etc., IT elements. I think supply chain provides a very, very wide field for future talents to grow and to take more responsibilities along their career in global companies. So I would, I'm advertising a little bit supply chain, see my passion for many, many years. And I think that can really make a difference. And as Lorenzo said, the leadership is key. You need to have a culture that fosters open discussions, that is less hierarchical. You can work very lateral in interdisciplinary functions and projects. I think there's a lot of ways to grow for international talent.
Yeah. Joachim, I can just, echo what you were describing. Also, in my experience while interviewing talent people for open position, typically, people want to work in supply chain or work in supply chain and are happy about it. They tend to like exactly what you're describing, the complexity, the fact that you need to interact at different level in the organization and so on. Still, it seems that probably there has been a general, I would say, probably a bit of war on talent. Supply chain profile are well needed in a lot of industries. Probably some industries that were underinvesting in supply chain are now investing more. So the experience I have is definitely an interesting career. People in supply chain really have this aim of growing. Still a bit of, I would say, struggle sometimes to find people and having a competitive offer and convincing them to come on board. I just want to, let's say, I will change a bit our agenda of questions. I have actually a question that is a good bridge versus what.
Sorry, Federico. I'll add one point. I just saw a comment from Torsten Budke from Capgemini on this talent acquisition element. Since he mentioned that, he mentions that from his point of view, a key to talent acquisition and retention is to accept that their business's understanding is not waterfall-like, hard-proven, KPI-driven business, but a way more agile and interactive approach. And that is a challenge to a long-term supply chain leader. So maybe what you were talking about before about agility and so on.
We come back to leadership.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, you're right, totally. So sorry, Federico, to your point.
I will just keep a bit of question because I think we have a very good bridge. One of the points I would like to ask you, from your experience and your point of view, how is the role in the new normal of a chief supply chain officer? How did it change? Do you have more, I would say, CEO attention time, board attention time? What have you been experiencing?
Well, I will answer on this. I think that the current context is providing, as I was mentioning before, is hitting the supply chain context is eating the top line and the bottom line of the P&L. Okay, so given this, for sure, we supply chain guys as having more attention from the board. I think that in any case, considering the fact that supply chain is a key player in achieving the sustainability commitment of the company, and if we want to enhance the collaboration, as we were mentioning before, with both customers and supplier, the more and more we have to see supply chain not just as a standalone function, but we have to see supply chain with an holistic perspective, which is going to help in the achievement of the overall corporate strategy.
Yeah, maybe to build on what Lorenzo said, I think the increased attention here from boards, from CEOs to the area of supply chain management, and I'm talking end-to-end supply chain management. Sometimes, obviously, supply chain is defined in a more narrow way, depending on the overall company organizational setup, but let's talk end-to-end supply chain, has definitely elevated, I would say, supply chain officers in their, I would say, appreciation and ability to influence a company's strategy and to contribute to the definition of a company's strategy. So that from execution to creation, I would say. I mean, you probably have seen, maybe in the future, my hypothesis is that there will be more and more supply chain officers becoming CEO over time than it used to be in the past. I mean, there have been some prominent examples, right? Tim Cook, for instance, from Apple, Mary Barra from General Motors. I think they all have such supply chain backgrounds, and you find many, many more. But I would expect that this is helping more because the world is very unpredictable and very complex. And of course, it is super important to develop new products, to have a customer engagement, provide stellar consumer experiences for your brand and build the brand, etc. But this is always assuming that the supply chain functions and delivers. Now, with all the risks there, I think there's so many dependencies that you can, or that a supply chain leader has the responsibility to install capabilities, build capabilities that are flexible, agile, adaptable to where the business strategy goes. So that means a supply chain leader needs to be involved in the highest strategic discussions of a company strategy. And I think from that perspective, there's an enlarged responsibility for supply chain leaders going forward. And as I said, I mean, being proactive, managing the complexity, etc., among all the other, I would say, important capable skills and traits of a senior leader.
Yeah, it's probably another element is maybe more and more, and that's not only at the chief supply chain officer level, but probably, yeah, starting at senior manager, even like that you're business savvy, no? You're aware of what the company is selling to. You have like customer knowledge. You understand what the final objective of the company is, not only what supply chains on paper example is, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I guess, Daniel, this goes a bit with let's say the discussion we were having earlier about supply chain used to be very focused about waste reduction, cost saving, and so on. Now the role is changing, and clearly also the talent and skill set is changing, and definitely requires more understanding about the business impact of what we do. And the people working in supply chain are adapting to that. That's, I would say, a normal, evolution process.
Yeah, definitely.
My personal reflection from my discussions and being on the management board, for instance, I was constantly, of course, following all the discussion and engaging in the discussion, but constantly translating scenarios on the business side into the impacts that it would have on my area of responsibility. Really instantly trying to connect business strategy discussions to supply chain strategy discussions, and injecting input, getting involved, also challenging. I think that is another element. I think that future talents in supply chain need to be more and more prepared to challenge hypotheses, commercial strategies, product strategies, IT architecture ideas, etc. Not from a perspective that we know it better, but to clearly understand the impacts that it has to the overall global supply chain network, and then engage in a constructive, solution-oriented discussion to align the different, sometimes conflicting interests in a company. And I think a supply chain leader, I fully agree with you, Daniel, it doesn't have to be the supply chain officer, but all levels of leaders in supply chain need to come with a solution-minded attitude and bring together, orchestrate the different interests into one common way of, or one common direction of fulfilling a commercial business strategy, a growth strategy, whatever it is, while I would say being able to live up to the reliability and agility requirements and efficiency requirements in a supply chain, which will still be there going forward.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Lorenzo, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add something about that, I think that if we elevate a bit the discussion, it is about how the board is operating. So on one side, I think the supply chain has to be involved in building up the business strategy, and the other way around, business has to be involved in the definition of the supply chain strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
kind
true.
Yeah,
it's also about that's more on like the CEO's plate to have supply chain as a priority if they want to see it working well, no?
Yeah, it's not only that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about sustainability? We actually have a question from the audience, Aryaman Nigam, who's asking whether we see the future of sustainability in global supply chains, given the current uncertainties in the global supply chain, which is actually pretty similar, Federico, to the question we'd prepared about carbon neutrality and sustainability. If it had an impact on the supply, on your sustainability plan, which is an important part of supply chain. Did you have to have plans changed in companies? Have companies adapted? What are your thoughts on that, Lorenzo and Joachim?
Yeah, we know that sustainability in the case is a key strategic axis for every single company, and we know that a supply chain is a key pillar if we want to achieve this commitment. So we have to have always a long-term perspective, and having this in mind, of course, we have not reduced the plan concerning sustainability in supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, same here. I would say the area of supply chain or the area of sustainability, I mean, is a significant demand from investors and from customers. That has been growing over the last years, and therefore, obviously, it must be a priority for all of the companies. And I would even argue, I mean, supply chain is the biggest utilizer of resources across a company. So I would say the responsibility to contribute and to implement a viable sustainability strategy is huge in supply chain, in the supply chain across the entire value chain.
Mm-hmm. Federico, is it very different in your industry, which is closer to automotive?
I would say sustainability is a major trend. Of course, there is also a regulation, I would say, aspect behind sustainability in the automotive industry. Maybe putting together a couple of points we highlighted earlier. Sustainability is becoming relevant. It was relevant, is becoming even more relevant right now. To a certain extent, whatever we are doing in terms of reliability, resilience, localization is going also in the direction of being more sustainable. Basically, what I'm experiencing, what I'm seeing is that we are not taking decision any longer only based on waste minimization, cost reduction, but we are really looking at multiple factors. I would say resilience, sustainability, cost, service to customer. To a certain extent, this new normal pushed us to be more aggressive in terms of sustainability, taking more tough decisions that maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, would not have been, I would say, the most obvious. They are now becoming quite obvious.
Maybe to add on to this one, I mean, like we discussed before, I mean, I want to highlight the area of integrated planning again, for instance. I mean, if you have end-to-end visibility that enables you with the proper tools that provides you end-to-end visibility, a company can deliver better plans and focus resources in a better way, and therefore actively contribute to the minimization of waste of resources, to the reduction of unnecessary activities, etc. So I think this is very much interlinked. I mean, it's one example that comes to my mind here, that from an integrated planning point of view, that you can actually actively impact the company's overall sustainability goals.
We have a few questions from the audience, which, by the way, if you have any questions left to ask, please feel free to send them now. Peter Bond, which is actually my partner, he manages the CPG Guys podcast in the US. Thanks for your questions. He has sent a couple of very interesting questions and leaning towards the commercial side, actually. One question is quite interesting. It's like, we know that a lot of brands have had stock problems, out of stock problems. He's asking, what's the expected impact on brand loyalty as supply chain capacity improves? Did the brands that lose customers due to low, like out of stocks, do you think that loyalty is broken forever, or is it easy to recover? It's a more marketing question, but obviously with a supply chain origin. So curious to know your thoughts.
I really think that it all depends on how strong was the link with the customer. And so if the loyalty and the relation with the customer was built in a proper way, and the link was really strong, then of course there was a possibility for the customer to test a different brand, but then for sure the customer would come back again. Otherwise, if the link was not strong enough, then the customer is lost.
Yeah, I would fully echo this one. I think the brand loyalty is key and supersedes, I would say, operational challenges like a stock out. But also, I would say it's super important how the customer experience is, how you treat a customer when he experiences a stock out, right? I think there's multiple ways. I think the customer engagement is key, and explanations, but also offering solutions, either alternative products or alternative terms whatsoever. I think this is also super important, the customer interface there.
Yeah. I mean, Daniel, there is something that we've been discussing last year when we had our podcast. The out of stock that we have been experiencing in the last 24, 30 months has been quite interesting. For a couple of companies, couple of industries, I would say, it's also been kind of a way to reprice themselves. Strategically leveraging this kind of shortfall of products to reprice. We have seen a lot in the consumer electronics. I think it was the PS5 that reached crazy price last year. It's happening in automotive. The waiting time equals to discount reduction. If we look more recently, I think the trend of out of stock, or in general, I would say supply constraint, we can experience as consumer when we travel, when we try to rent a car, when we try to book an hotel room. So definitely there is, I would say, a link between some product and the brand. But there are also a lot of industry that actually benefited out of this out of stock that was, I would say, shared across the industry in terms of repricing. Quite an interesting phenomena that, at least in my professional life, I've never seen before.
Peter also asked if retail consolidation, is likely to accelerate in order to being on the short end of the inventory allocation spectrum. Maybe Federico, you can help me translate that into something I'll understand.
Yeah. I think the reason behind is, if you are a small retailer and there is a supply constraint, you might be deprioritized, and the product might go only to the big player. Does it, according to your experience, Lorenzo and Joachim, does it play a role in consolidation?
Well, yes. I think yes, and it was the case above all when talking about ingredients, raw material, and packaging components. So yes.
Generally, yes. On the other hand, I think it depends also a little bit on the, I would say, commercial strategy, because if you have, let's say, a smaller customer chain whatsoever where you have big growth ambitions, you might prioritize even smaller guys and ladies above bigger ones because you expect higher growth rates. But yeah, I mean, of course, it depends a lot on the commitments. As you say, if you have certain penalties for not delivering, then obviously you're trying to minimize that exposure as well.
Perfect. Well, I wanted to ask you these questions from the audience. I know that we're hitting the time limit. So I personally, as part of the audience, because whenever I produce a podcast, I consider myself to be part of the audience. I have a question as well. How do you think, like, if in a couple of sentences, if I ask you about the state of supply chain in 1 year, what is your bet in terms of what the scenario will look like? Federico, sorry, but I'm asking this to you too.
Okay, I can go first. I'm expecting a continued disruption, one after the other. Yes, they might switch from supply to demand disruption. I expect volatility to stay. I'm expecting a new inflow of talents, young people attracted to supply chain. And then with this inflow of talents, coupled with all the digital transformation happening, probably we will see, like kind of new supply chain business model, new technologies, or improvement in the current existing technology that are still kind of a niche. So that's my forecast, I would say, for the next year.
Thanks, Federico. Lorenzo, please go next.
I agree with Federico on the demand side. So volatile environment and short-term supply chain crisis. That's for sure. With the demand, as I was mentioning at the very beginning, that could be impacted by inflation. I think that there will be still a big focus on digitalization and on reinforcement of collaboration. Sustainability for sure is going to be another axe on which supply chain all the supply chain guys will work on, and I think that will at both levels that there will be a questioning at least about the overall setup of supply chain, both to improve resilience, to improve agility, and to maybe regionalize the supply chain if this is not yet the case.
Joachim, how do you see? What does your crystal ball say?
Exactly, I was going to look for my crystal ball, but no. But as I said, guys, it's the volatility remains. I would expect demand still to stay high, disruptions to continue, but I also expect that investments made will continue into capacity, into inventories in order to increase the level of safety across the supply chain. I would also expect that there will be a reassessment and maybe a shift to certain sourcing countries, maybe to an increase to higher emerging countries like Vietnam, Mexico, Brazil. becoming more and more important. Maybe China will be looked a little bit more critical, obviously, and as Lorenzo said, and as we discussed already, into a more regionalized, closer to consumers setup from a supply chain point of view. That could be a trend, but also the investments in technology and sustainability for sure. This is here to stay.
Okay. Thanks, Emil. I appreciate you, Federico, first of all, for co-hosting this crazy idea I had one day with me. I appreciate it. And Lorenzo and Joachim, also thanks a lot for not only being here, but also sharing your thoughts and ideas with us and the audience.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Excellent. And thanks to the audience also for joining us. Again, this content will be available on demand, actually both on this link. So if you go into this link anytime, you can see the discussion, and also via podcast with audio only on the FMCG Guys podcast. Well, that's all, folks. Thanks, Emil, for joining, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.